Before we begin, a quick note. The story you're about to hear is mine. Some parts are hard to tell, and some parts, I'll admit, I enjoy telling a little too much. It's a story about what happens when people who are supposed to value you decide you're worthless. But more than that, it's a story about how sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest truths. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told your work, your passion, or your very presence was an unnecessary overhead, then this story is for you too. My name is Dr. Althea Grant, and for 22 years I was the head archivist for Sterling and Finch Artisanal Instruments, a company that had been making world-class pianos and violins since 1922. I say was because my tenure, along with the tenure of my entire department, ended on a Tuesday. It ended not with a gold watch or a warm farewell, but with a sterile email from an unfamiliar human resources address, followed by the appearance of two security guards who looked like they'd be more comfortable breaking up a bar fight than escorting a woman in a cardigan out of a dusty, climate-controlled basement. The man responsible was Alistair Finch. He was not, I should clarify, related to the founding Finch family. He was a new money tycoon, a corporate raider with a face that seemed permanently frozen in a smirk of condescending appraisal. He'd bought out the company in what the papers called a hostile takeover, a term that felt laughably inadequate to describe the violation of it all. Alistair Finch saw Sterling and Finch not as a legacy of artistry, but as a brand name to be slapped onto mass-produced garbage. He saw a balance sheet, and on that balance sheet, my life's work preserving the soul of the company was a line item under inefficiencies. He'd held a town hall meeting the week before, striding onto the stage in a suit so sharp and black it seemed to absorb the light around it. He talked about synergy and optimization and right-sizing. They are beautiful, clean words for ugly, messy things. He never once mentioned the instruments themselves, the century of craftsmanship, or the people who had dedicated their lives to it. My department, the Archives and Corporate History Division, was housed in the sub-basement, a quiet world of controlled humidity and the gentle, papery scent of old documents. We were the company's memory. We had the original schematics for the first Sterling Concert Grand, the employment ledgers from the Great Depression, the letters from world-famous virtuosos praising our instruments, and we had the founding documents, the original articles of incorporation, the bylaws, the charter, all from 1922. Alistair Finch, in his infinite wisdom, had never even bothered to visit us. He simply saw the budget for our climate control systems, our archival-grade materials, our salaries, and decided we were a fossilized limb that needed amputating. The official notice stated our department was being dissolved, and its functions deemed non-essential to the forward-facing strategic goals of the new ownership. So on that Tuesday, I found myself standing on the sidewalk, holding a pathetic little cardboard box containing a chipped coffee mug, a framed photo of my late parents, and a silver letter opener shaped like a violin bow. My team, my three loyal archivists, Leo, Maria, and Ben, stood with me, all of them looking shell-shocked. Leo, who had only been with us for 5 years but had the passion of a lifer, looked like he was about to be sick. "What do we do now, Dr. Grant?" he asked, his voice small. I had no answer. I was 54 years old. My entire professional life had been dedicated to one place, a place that had just declared me irrelevant. Alistair Finch hadn't just fired me, he had erased me. He had taken my story, my purpose, and fed it into a corporate shredder. As I looked back at the stately old brick building, a quote from his interview in the Financial Times echoed in my head. The reporter had asked him about preserving the company's history. "History doesn't pay the bills," Finch had sneered. "My job is to trim the fat, to cut out the unnecessary overhead, the sentimental indulgence we can no longer afford." Unnecessary overhead, sentimental indulgence. He was talking about me, about my work, about the very soul of the company he'd just purchased. He thought he was trimming fat. The irony, the beautiful soul-shattering irony, was that he had no idea what he'd just thrown away. He didn't know that in his haste to discard the past, he'd handed me the keys to his future. because my unnecessary work included managing the company's founding documents, and hidden deep within the dense, archaic legal language of the original 1922 charter was a clause I had discovered 15 years ago, a clause so peculiar, so potent, that I had committed it to memory, a poison pill. The founder, a man named Silas Sterling, had been a staunch idealist, a man deeply suspicious of corporate raiders and Wall Street vultures even back in the 1920s. He'd worked with his lawyer to embed a failsafe. The charter stated, in language both elegant and ironclad, that in the event of a hostile takeover by an entity that did not carry the approval of the Standing Board, and which resulted in the dissolution of the Archives and Corporate History Division, a controlling stake of the company's non-public shares would be automatically transferred to an employee-run trust, a trust to be established and managed in perpetuity by the acting head archivist at the time of the takeover, me. Alistair Finch, the ruthless tycoon, had just fired the one person he should have kept. He'd thrown the memory keeper out into the street, not realizing she was holding the one memory that could destroy him. Standing there on the curb, with the city noise buzzing around me and the cardboard box digging into my hip, I felt a tremor of something that wasn't despair. It was cold, it was quiet, and it felt terrifyingly like power. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet, anyway. At that moment it was about a century-old promise, a promise made by a dead man to protect his legacy, and I was the only one left who knew how to keep it. The hours after being fired are a strange, disorienting blur. You exist in a kind of temporal void. The rhythms of your life, the morning commute, the first cup of coffee at your desk, the familiar creak of your chair are gone, replaced by a vast, echoing silence. I drove home in a daze, my little box of memories sitting on the passenger seat like a tiny coffin. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet order, felt like a museum of a life that had ended. Every book on my shelves about history and preservation seemed to mock me. I did what you're supposed to do. I called my family. My younger brother, Marcus, answered on the third ring, his voice already distracted. Marcus was in marketing. He lived in a world of buzzwords and brand activations, a world I never quite understood. He was the golden child, the one my parents had always lauded for his ambition and his easy charm, while my quiet academic pursuits were treated as a quaint, harmless hobby. Althea, what's up? I'm in the middle of a launch prep, he said, the sound of keyboard clicks punctuating his words. I took a deep breath. I lost my job, Marcus. They fired me, the whole department. A pause. The clicking stopped. Fired you? You're kidding. Why? The new CEO, Alistair Finch. He's cutting costs, he said. He said we were overhead. The word felt like ash in my mouth. Another pause. This one was different. It was analytical. Finch, right. The guy's a shark. I've been following this. Listen, Thea. I know this is rough, but you've got to look at it from a business perspective. Sterling and Finch has been coasting for years. It needed a shakeup. This guy is streamlining. Sometimes you have to make tough cuts for the health of the company. I felt a cold prickle spread across my scalp. The health of the company, Marcus, they're going to start making pianos in China. They're gutting the apprenticeship program. My job was to protect the company's legacy, and he just eliminated it. Okay, but let's be honest, he said, his voice taking on that familiar condescendingly gentle tone he used when he was about to explain the real worlds to me. It was a bit of a dead-end job, wasn't it? Sorting through dusty old papers in a basement. Maybe this is a good thing, a chance for you to find something, more modern, more relevant. I couldn't speak. The casual, unthinking cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't just that he didn't understand. It was that he didn't even see that there was anything to understand. My life's work, my passion, was just dusty old papers to him, the same way it was overhead to Alistair Finch. I was surrounded by men who saw value only in things they could quantify on a spreadsheet. I have to go. I managed to whisper, and hung up before he could offer any more of his helpful soul-crushing advice. That evening my mother called. She'd already spoken to Marcus, of course. "Oh dear," she began, her voice a symphony of feigned sympathy and underlying judgment. "Marcus told me. I'm so sorry, but you know he made a good point. You're so smart, Althea. You could do anything. You never had to stay in that musty old place for so long. Remember when Marcus got that big promotion at the ad agency? We were so proud. He's always been such a go-getter." The comparison hung in the air, as it always did. Marcus, the go-getter, the golden child. Me, the quiet, scholarly disappointment, who had settled for a musty old place. I remembered that promotion. My parents had thrown a dinner party for him. That same week, I had successfully authenticated a lost letter from Clara Schumann, a discovery that made minor waves in the music history world. When I mentioned it, my father had patted my hand and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to Marcus to ask about his new sales targets. My achievement was a curiosity, his was a success. That night, alone in my apartment, the full weight of it all came crashing down. It wasn't just the job. It was the crushing realization that the people who were supposed to be my rock, my family, saw me the same way Alistair Finch did, as something quaint and obsolete, a sentimental indulgence. I wandered through my quiet rooms, touching the spines of my books, looking at the historical maps on my walls. This was who I was, and for the first time in my life, I felt profoundly, deeply ashamed of it. The low point came 3 days later. I hadn't left the apartment. I'd been cycling through the 5 stages of grief at an alarming rate, mostly bouncing between anger and a deep, heavy depression. I was watching the business news channel, a form of self-flagellation, I suppose, when his face appeared. Alistair Finch, looking smug and triumphant on the cover of Corporate Titan Monthly. The headline read, "The Streamliner, How Alistair Finch Cut the Dead Wood and Revitalized an American Icon." The interviewer asked him about the layoffs. Finch laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. "You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs," he said. "We had departments that were pure legacy costs, an entire division dedicated to, I don't know, filing old receipts. It was a sentimental country club, not a business. We cleared it out. Now we have a lean, hungry operation ready for the 21st century, filing old receipts." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it, the disrespect. He didn't just fire me, he was dancing on the grave of my career, rewriting history to paint himself as a hero and me as a lazy, useless burden. My brother's words came back to me. "Maybe this is a good thing," my mother's voice. "He's always been such a go-getter." They were all on his side, the side of the loud, the shiny, the new, the side of men who broke things and called it progress. I turned off the television. The silence in the room was absolute. I walked to my bookshelf, not the one with history tomes, but a smaller one in my study where I kept personal items. Tucked away at the back was an old leather-bound photo album. I opened it to a page I knew by heart. It was a photograph from 1923, a black and white image of the company's founder, Silas Sterling, standing with his entire staff, from the master craftsmen to the janitors. He was a stern-looking man with a walrus mustache, but his eyes held a kindness. He had his hand on the shoulder of a young boy, the son of one of his woodworkers. The caption, written in my own archival ink on a slip of acid-free paper, read Silas Sterling and the Sterling and Finch family, 1923. He called them his family. He built the company on a principle of shared respect. He despised men like Alistair Finch. He had foreseen them, a century ago. It was in that moment that something inside me shifted. The despair didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It hardened from a murky, suffocating fog into a sharp, clear diamond of resolve. The grief was still there, but now it had a purpose. It wasn't about my hurt feelings anymore. It wasn't about my brother's approval, or my mother's pride. It was about Silas Sterling's legacy. It was about the schematics for the first concert grand, and the letters from virtuosas, and the century of artistry that a man like Finch could never comprehend, let alone value. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. But as I stood there, staring at that old photograph, a new thought took root in my mind, a cold and quiet and powerful thought. It was about justice. A justice so old, it had been waiting 100 years for someone to deliver it. I closed the album and walked over to my secure fireproof safe, a small, unassuming box in the back of my closet. I spun the dial, the clicks echoing in the silent apartment. Inside, beneath my passport and a few pieces of heirloom jewelry, was a small, unassuming spool of microfilm. A perfect high-resolution copy of the original 1922 Articles of Incorporation and Corporate Charter of Sterling and Finch Artisanal Instruments. I had made it 15 years ago, during a system-wide document preservation project. My boss at the time had called me paranoid. I called it being a good archivist. I pulled it out. The plastic felt cool and solid in my hand. It was time to get to work. The first step in any plan is to stop mourning what you've lost and start cataloging what you have left. My grief had become an archive of its own, full of slights and dismissals, a long and detailed history of being underestimated. And an archivist's job, after all, is to bring the past into the present. I was about to stage the most significant historical exhibit of my entire career. The first call I made was to Leo. He picked up on the first ring, his voice frayed with anxiety. He'd spent the last week carpet bombing the city with his resume and had received nothing but automated rejections. He was living in a tiny apartment with a mountain of student debt, and his part-time job at Sterling and Finch had been his lifeline, his hope for a real career in the field he loved. Now he was facing the prospect of having to go back to working at a call center, a job that had nearly broken his spirit before he'd met me. "Dr. Grant, are you okay?" he asked, his concern for me overriding his own panic. That was Leo, pure gold. "I'm fine, Leo. Better than fine," I said, and the strength in my own voice surprised me. "Listen to me very carefully. I need your help, and I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Anything." "Good. Meet me at the Tiverton Public Library in an hour, the local history room, and Leo, don't mention this to anyone, not Maria, not Ben, not a soul. This stays between us." An hour later, we were huddled over a dusty microfilm reader in a secluded carrel, the ghostly, backlit image of the 1922 charter glowing between us. Leo's eyes were wide as I pointed to Article 9, Section 4. The language was dense, a forest of heretofores and whereases, but the intent was crystal clear once you hacked through the undergrowth. I had spent a decade and a half deciphering such documents. It was like a second language to me. I translated it for him, my finger tracing the spidery text on the screen. It says that in the event of a corporate restructuring initiated by a new controlling party, a party not approved by a 2/3 majority of the pre-existing board of directors, which he wasn't, it was a hostile takeover, and if said restructuring results in the termination of the division responsible for the company's historical preservation, that's us, then a majority of the company's Class F founders' shares, currently held in the corporate treasury, shall be immediately conveyed to a trust. Leo stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "A trust? What kind of trust?" I took a deep breath before delivering the final beautiful blow. "An employee-run trust, for the benefit of all active employees, to be administered by a 3-person board with the chairperson to be," and I quote, "the ranking officer of the aforementioned Historical Preservation Division at the time of its dissolution." I looked at him, letting the words sink in. "Leo, that's me." He leaned back in his chair, his hands coming up to cover his face. He let out a long, slow breath that was half laugh, half sob. "Oh my God," he whispered through his fingers. Oh, my God. Dr. Grant, are you serious? Is this real? It's as real as the paper it was written on, I said. Silas Sterling was a visionary. He saw men like Alistair Finch coming a century away. He built a fortress into the company's DNA, and he made the head archivist the gatekeeper. Finch thought he was demolishing a dusty old shed. He had no idea it was the main castle wall. This was the foresight. The beautiful, quiet foresight of a man long dead and a woman who respected his work. This was the hidden leverage. But having it and using it were two different things. For the next 2 weeks, Leo and I turned that library Carol into our secret headquarters. He was a brilliant researcher, quick and meticulous. While I focused on the legal precedent, he dove into the company's more recent history, digging through old financial reports and board meeting minutes we'd downloaded from the corporate server on our last day. Another one of my paranoid habits. We discovered that the poison pill was even more potent than I'd realized. The founder's shares constituted a staggering 55% controlling interest in the company. They had been sitting dormant in the treasury for decades, considered little more than a historical artifact by generations of complacent boards. No one had ever thought to challenge or remove the clause because no one had ever imagined a scenario so specific and catastrophic as a hostile takeover and the simultaneous destruction of the archives. It was a lock that required two very specific keys, and Alistair Finch, in his arrogant haste, had just turned both of them. Our greatest ally came from an unexpected place. My late father, for all his preference for Marcus's brand of flashy success, had been a cautious man. His younger brother, my Uncle Robert, had been a lawyer, a brilliant if cantankerous corporate litigator who had retired a few years back. My father and he had a falling out decades ago over some family squabble. I was too young to understand, but on my father's deathbed, he had made me promise to keep in touch with Robert, saying only, "You're more like him than you think. You'll need him someday." I hadn't spoken to Uncle Robert in years, but my father's words echoed in my mind. Taking a leap of faith, I called him. I laid out the entire situation, my voice steady, presenting the facts as I would in an archival report. He was silent for a long time after I finished, and I was sure he was about to dismiss me. Then he let out a low whistle. "Althea, my dear girl," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Your father always said you were the clever one. This is the most beautifully vicious piece of corporate maneuvering I've ever seen. And the beauty of it is, you didn't maneuver a thing, you're just following the rules, the very, very old rules." Uncle Robert became our secret weapon. He refused any payment, calling it the most fun I've had since I made Global Petroil divest their entire South American portfolio. He worked pro bono, drafting the official notices, poring over a century of case law regarding corporate charters. He found a little-known state law from the 1930s that gave founding charters almost biblical authority, a law designed to protect old family companies from Wall Street predators during the Depression. It had never been repealed. "It's magnificent," he'd chortle over the phone. "Finch's high-priced lawyers are all experts in modern contract law. They're playing chess. We, my dear, are playing a much older game. We're playing Go, and we've already surrounded them." This was the secret plan taking shape. It was no longer just a spool of microfilm and a desperate idea. It was a strategy, backed by law and precedent. Leo would gather the evidence of the hostile takeover's nature, the lack of board approval, the immediate, targeted cuts. I would provide the historical context and the charter itself, and Uncle Robert would be the one to light the fuse. He was a strategy, backed by Laudern when his Heim. During this time, my own family's dismissiveness became a kind of perverse fuel. My mother would call, her voice dripping with pity. "Dear, have you started looking for a new position? Maybe something in administration? You have such good organizational skills." She suggested I could help Marcus organize his files. The condescension was so thick I could feel it coating the phone. My brother, Marcus, was even worse. He was all in on the new Sterling and Finch. He'd had a preliminary interview for a marketing role there, and he spoke of Alistair Finch with a kind of breathless reverence. The man's a genius, Thea. You have to see the vision. He's taking a dusty old violin company and turning it into a global luxury brand. He's turning it into a lie, Marcus. I told him during one painful phone call, he's trading a century of integrity for a brand. Oh, don't be so dramatic, he scoffed. It's called business. It's about the bottom line. It's not about feelings or history. It wasn't about revenge for you, was it? You just couldn't stand to see someone succeed where you were content to just be. That was the line that stuck with me. It wasn't about revenge until it was. He was wrong, of course. It had started as justice. But hearing the glee in my brother's voice as he sided with the man who had destroyed my life, hearing my mother's pitying sighs, it added a new, sharper edge to my resolve. They had all written me off. The quiet one, the dusty one, the one who didn't understand the real world. They were about to get a lesson in the power of the past. They thought history was a dead thing, a collection of stories in a book. I knew the truth. History is a living thing, and sometimes it has teeth. The plan was set. We had the documents, we had the legal strategy, we had the element of complete and total surprise. It was time to stop planning and start acting. It was time to make our first move. The first move wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a thunderous declaration. That wasn't my style, and it wasn't the nature of our weapon. The power of the archive is its quiet, unshakable authority. Our first move was a single perfectly crafted letter. Uncle Robert had drafted it, and it was a masterpiece of understated lethality. It was addressed not to Alistair Finch, but to each member of the board of directors, delivered by courier to their homes, and simultaneously filed with the state's corporate commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The letter was short. It simply stated that pursuant to Article 9, Section 4 of the original 1922 corporate charter, a hostile takeover event had been triggered and the ancillary conditions had been met. It formally notified them that the controlling block of founders' shares held in the company treasury were, by the charter's own automatic and non-negotiable terms, to be immediately transferred into the newly formed Sterling Employee Legacy Trust. It named me, Dr. Althea Grant, former head archivist, as the chairperson and legal administrator of said trust. It was signed by my uncle's law firm, and then we waited. For 3 days there was nothing but silence. It was the most agonizing 72 hours of my life. I sat in my apartment, jumping at every sound. Leo and I had a constant open chat window on our laptops, a silent vigil of 2 words typed back and forth every hour: anything, nothing. I started to doubt myself. Was it all a delusion? A fantasy cooked up by a woman who had lost everything? Maybe Finch's lawyers would find some loophole. Maybe they would just laugh, shred the letter, and that would be the end of it. My brother called during that time, bubbling with excitement. He'd had a second interview. He was talking about his new potential office, the view it would have. I just murmured my congratulations, my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. Then on the 4th day, the world broke. It started not with a call, but with a news alert on my phone from a financial news service. The headline was cautious but explosive. Unusual filing challenges Finch's control of Sterling and Finch. The article was short on details, mentioning only a dispute over a century-old charter provision filed by a former employee. But it was enough. The market hates uncertainty. Within an hour, Sterling and Finch's stock, which had been climbing steadily under Finch's new regime, wobbled. It dropped 2%, then 5%. The panic began. My phone, which had been silent for days, started to ring. It was a reporter from the local paper, then one from a national business journal. I followed my uncle's explicit instructions. I didn't answer. I let it all go to voicemail. My only statement was the letter itself, the facts. Leo was my eyes and ears. His friends still inside the company were messaging him in a panic. The letter had landed like a bomb in the executive suite. Alistair Finch, they said, had at first dismissed it as a joke. A frivolous, pathetic lawsuit from a disgruntled librarian, he'd apparently bellowed. He'd ordered his legal team to crush it. But his lawyers, the high-priced sharks from a Manhattan firm, couldn't crush it. Because it wasn't a lawsuit, it was a notification of an existing condition. It was like notifying someone that, according to the laws of physics, gravity was still in effect. They could argue with it all they wanted, but the apple was still going to fall. The company's lawyers pulled the original charter from the corporate vault, the very document I had spent my life protecting. They read the clause, they checked the state laws my uncle had cited. According to Leo's sources, the head of Finch's legal team, a woman named Cynthia Lowell, went into his office and was in there for over an hour. When she came out, her face was pale. The company was forced to issue a statement. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, acknowledging an inquiry into the company's foundational governance documents, but assuring investors that Finch's leadership was uncontested. The market didn't buy it. The stock slid another 10%. The true sign of Finch's panic came in the form of a phone call. It was an unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding. Dr. Althea Grant. The voice was slick, professional. Who is this? I asked. My name is Arthur Webb. I'm with the legal counsel for Sterling and Finch. We received your notification. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Finch considers this a malicious and frivolous action, and he is prepared to pursue legal remedies against you for tortious interference. He is, however, a reasonable man. He is prepared to offer you a generous severance package, a sum of, let's say, $100,000, in exchange for a full retraction of this baseless claim and a signed non-disclosure agreement. The offer was insulting. It was a pittance, a nuisance fee, but it told me everything I needed to know. They were scared. If they truly believed the claim was baseless, they would have ignored it. Instead, they were trying to buy my silence. They were trying to put a price on a century of history. I took a breath, channeling my uncle's cantankerous calm. Mr. Webb, I said. My voice as cool and dry as an archival vault. Please inform Mr. Finch that I am not a disgruntled employee. I am the acting chairperson of the Sterling Employee Legacy Trust, and I am merely fulfilling my fiduciary duty as outlined in the corporate charter. The charter is not a suggestion, it is a contract. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the tremor of adrenaline, the thrill of the quiet librarian, finally speaking truth to power. Alistair Finch's panic escalated. He went on the offensive, giving an interview where he called me a nobody, a vengeful paper pusher, attempting to extort the company. He tried to paint it as a personal vendetta. He didn't understand that he was making my case for me. His public, vitriolic attacks only served to highlight his character, the very kind of character Silas Sterling had sought to protect his company from. The narrative began to shift. Legal bloggers and corporate governance experts started writing articles. They were fascinated by the archaic clause, this corporate ghost that had come back to haunt a modern tycoon. They started calling it the archivist's gambit. The story was no longer just about a business dispute. It was a David and Goliath tale. The quiet, fired archivist versus the ruthless billionaire, the past versus the present. It was a story people understood, a story they wanted to believe in. Alistair Finch thought he was in a legal battle. He was, but he was also in a public relations war, and he had handed me all the best ammunition. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated the power of a good story, and that was a mistake that was going to cost him everything. The news of the archivist's gambit broke through the financial pages and into the mainstream. It was a story too delicious to ignore, the fired librarian, who might end up owning the company. My quiet, ordered life was turned upside down. Reporters camped outside my apartment building. My phone rang incessantly. But the most profound shift, the one that shook me to my core, was the reaction from my family. It began with a text from my mother. Althea dear, I saw your picture on the news. Is it true? Call me. The tone was no longer pitying, it was breathless, excited. An hour later, Marcus called. His voice, once so full of smug certainty, was now a reedy, uncertain thing. Thea, I've been trying to reach you. What is going on? People at work are talking. They're saying you're taking over the company. I'm not taking over anything, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm executing the legal will of the company's founder. Right, the legal will, he said, stumbling over the words. Listen, I think I might have been a bit harsh before, about Finch. I didn't have all the facts. This guy sounds like a real piece of work firing you like that. It's despicable. The whiplash of his reversal was so sudden it was almost comical. Is it, Marcus? I asked quietly. A week ago you thought he was a genius. You told me business wasn't about feelings or history. Well, yeah, but this is different. This is about family. We have to stick together. Mom and we're behind you, 100%. We always have been. We always have been. The lie was so bald, so transparent, it left me speechless. It was a desperate, clumsy attempt to rewrite our family's history, to erase decades of dismissal in a single sentence. He wasn't seeing me, Althea. He was seeing a person who might suddenly have immense power, and he was scrambling to get on the right side of it. The final, pathetic act of this family drama came 2 days later. My doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw them standing in the hallway, my mother clutching her purse, and Marcus, shifting his weight from foot to foot, holding a peace offering, a ridiculously expensive-looking bottle of wine. This was the family exodus, the migration from the land of condescension to the promised land of my potential new influence. I opened the door. Althea, my mother chirped, her smile stretched painfully wide. We were so worried. We just had to come see you, to make sure you were all right with all this madness. We brought wine, Marcus added, holding up the bottle, as if it were a holy relic, to celebrate. We are so proud of you. I always knew you had this in you, that quiet strength, the same quality they had spent my entire life interpreting as weakness, as a lack of ambition. It was all I could do not to laugh in their faces. This was the most debatable character logic I'd ever witnessed in my life, and it was happening right in my own hallway. Their choices were so emotionally transparent, so driven by a sudden panic of being left behind, that it was almost pitiable. They weren't evil, they were just weak. Their loyalty as fluid as water, always seeking the highest ground. I didn't invite them in. I just stood in the doorway, my hand on the doorknob. Why are you here, really? I asked, my voice calm. My mother's smile faltered. What do you mean, dear? We're here to support you. No, you're not, I said, the truth of it feeling clean and liberating. You're here because you saw me on the news. You're here because the dusty old job you both pitied me for might turn out to be important. You're here because Marcus is worried about the job he wanted with the man I'm currently fighting. You're not proud. You're opportunistic. Marcus's face flushed a deep, ugly red. That's not fair, Althea. We're your family. Are you? I looked from his face to my mother's, seeing not malice but a lifetime of casual, unthinking selfishness. When I was fired, Marcus, you told me it was a good thing. Mom, you told me to be more like my go-getter brother. Neither of you offered support. You offered judgment. You sided with the man who called my life's work sentimental indulgence. You don't get to come here now with a bottle of wine and pretend you were on my side all along. You don't get to rewrite this history. I'm an archivist. I keep the records. I know exactly what happened. I could see the shock in their eyes. They had never heard this tone from me before. I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who absorbed the slights and smoothed things over. They were expecting the old Althea. They were not prepared for this one. My mother's face crumpled. Althea, you're being cruel. No, I said softly. I'm being precise. There's a difference. It wasn't about revenge until it was. And this small personal victory, this moment of finally holding up a mirror to their hypocrisy, felt as significant as any corporate battle. I looked at the wine bottle in my brother's hand. I don't want your wine, Marcus. I don't want your sudden convenient pride. I want you to go home and think about what the word supports actually means. And with that, I closed the door. I leaned against it, listening to their stunned silence in the hallway, followed by my mother's frantic whispering and the sound of their retreating footsteps. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. I had simply stated the truth, and in doing so I had finalized my own personal declaration of independence. The power shift wasn't just happening at Sterling and Finch, it was happening right here in the doorway of my apartment. I was no longer their quaint, harmless, dusty old Althea. I was Dr. Grant. And I was just getting started. The final confrontation was scheduled for a week later. The board of Sterling and Finch, under immense pressure from the SEC and their own terrified shareholders, had called an emergency meeting. The agenda had a single item: resolution of the 1922 charter mandate. Alistair Finch's desperate legal challenges had all failed. The courts had affirmed that the charter was a binding document and that the state's old preservation laws gave it precedence. His last-ditch effort was to persuade the board to somehow invalidate the clause, a move my uncle assured me was legally impossible but would be Finch's only remaining play. The meeting was held in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Sterling and Finch building, the very building I had been escorted out of in disgrace just weeks earlier. It was a strange full-circle moment walking back through those doors. This time, however, I wasn't carrying a cardboard box. I was flanked by my Uncle Robert, looking regal in a tailored suit, and Leo, who I had insisted come with me. I had paid off his student loans with a small portion of my savings the week before. The look of stunned, tearful gratitude on his face was worth more than any stock portfolio. He was now my official aide, and he walked beside me with a newfound confidence, carrying a single slim leather briefcase. We entered the boardroom. It was exactly as I'd imagined, a long, polished mahogany table reflecting the grim faces of the 10 board members. At the head of the table sat Alistair Finch. He looked terrible. His perpetual smirk was gone, replaced by a pasty, strained expression. His eyes were bloodshot, and when he saw me, a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred crossed his face. He saw me not just as a threat, but as an absurdity. The librarian who was ruining everything. Grant, he spat the name like it was poison. So you decided to show up, come to enjoy the show before we have you sanctioned for legal harassment. I didn't reply. I simply took my seat opposite him, placing my hands calmly on the table. My Uncle Robert sat to my right, Leo to my left. The room was thick with tension. The board members, a mix of old guard legacy appointees and Finch's new yes-men, wouldn't meet my eyes. The meeting began. Finch's lead lawyer, Cynthia Lowell, stood up and launched into a desperate, rambling argument. She claimed the charter clause was an anachronism, that it was never intended to be used in a modern context, that it was a threat to shareholder value and corporate stability. She argued that I, a low-level clerical worker with a grudge, was holding the company hostage. It was a performance of pure bluster, and I let her go on. I watched the faces of the board members, the old guard members, 2 men and a woman who had been on the board for decades, looked increasingly uncomfortable. They remembered the company as it was. They knew the legacy Finch was destroying. When she finally ran out of steam, the chairman of the board, a nervous-looking man named Peterson, cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Lowell. Dr. Grant, do you or your counsel have a response?" My Uncle Robert simply smiled. "We do not have a response, Mr. Chairman, because there is nothing to respond to. Miss Lowell has presented an emotional appeal. We are here to discuss a point of law which has already been affirmed by the courts. The charter is the charter. The only item on the agenda is its execution." Finch slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses jump. "This is insane. You are going to let this nobody destroy this company out of some misplaced sentimentality. I am offering you progress, profit, a future. She is offering you a museum." And that's when I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but in the silent, tense room, it carried like a bell. "You're wrong, Mr. Finch," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "I'm not offering them a museum. I'm reminding them that they already own one. A living museum, one that produces the finest instruments in the world. A legacy of craftsmanship that you have mistaken for overhead. A brand that you think you can buy, but you have no idea how to earn." I paused, letting my words settle. "You call me a nobody. You're right. In your world, I am. I'm not a tycoon. I'm not a raider. I'm an archivist. My job is to know the story, and you, sir, never bothered to read the first chapter." Leo, on my cue, opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out legal documents. He pulled out a single large glossy photograph and placed it in the center of the table. It was the picture from my album. Silas Sterling, standing with his entire family of employees. "That," I said softly, "is the company. That is what you bought. Not just the name, not just the assets. You bought a promise made to those people and the generations that followed them, a promise that their work, their legacy, would be protected from men exactly like you." A silence fell over the room. The old guard board members stared at the photograph. I saw a flicker of something in their eyes: memory, shame, resolve. One of them, an elderly man named George Cromwell, who had known my own father, finally spoke. He looked at Finch, his expression one of deep disappointment. "He's right, Alistair. Silas Sterling's will is woven into the fabric of this company. We all knew it, but we'd forgotten. We let you convince us that the numbers were all that mattered." He then turned to the chairman. "There is nothing to debate. The charter is clear. I move that we vote to formally recognize the transfer of the founder's shares to the Sterling Employee Legacy Trust, effective immediately." Another legacy member seconded the motion. Finch's face went from red to a terrifying mottled white. He looked at his own board appointees, but they saw the writing on the wall. Their patron was a sinking ship. One by one, they mumbled their assent. The vote was unanimous. It was over. Just like that, the new reality dawned. In the space of a single vote, Alistair Finch went from being a ruthless tycoon to a minority shareholder in a company controlled by an employee trust, a trust that was managed by the woman he had fired and humiliated. The look on his face was something I will archive in my memory forever. It was a cocktail of pure disbelief, impotent rage, and the sickening, gut-wrenching realization that he had been beaten. Not by a bigger shark, but by a piece of paper from 1922, by history, by the very thing he had dismissed as worthless. He stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched backward. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You will regret this." I met his gaze, my expression calm. "No, Mr. Finch," I said. "You will." And with that, my Uncle Robert, Leo and I stood up and walked out of the boardroom, leaving him to survey the ruins of his empire. The months that followed were a whirlwind, but a good one. A purposeful one. The Sterling Employee Legacy Trust was formally established, and as its chairperson, my first act was to call a company-wide meeting. I stood on the same stage where Alistair Finch had announced his brutal cuts, but my message was different. I announced that the dead wood was being brought back. I rehired my entire archival team, with Leo promoted to be my deputy director. I reinstated the apprenticeship program for young instrument makers. I nullified the contracts for overseas mass production and announced we were reinvesting in our local workshops, in our people. The applause was deafening. It was a sound of relief, of hope, of a future reclaimed. We established the new employee-run board, comprised of craftspeople, administrators, and sales staff. For the first time, the people who made the instruments had a say in the direction of the company. Profits were still important, of course, but they were no longer the only god we served. Quality, legacy, and community became our guiding principles once more. Alistair Finch, stripped of his power, sold his minority shares at a massive loss and vanished from the business world, his reputation shattered by the humiliating story of his defeat. He became a cautionary tale, the tycoon who was outsmarted by a librarian. As for my own family, their story had a much quieter, more pathetic ending. After I had closed the door on them, they had retreated. There were no more calls, no more texts. Marcus lost his chance at the marketing job, of course, and I heard through the grapevine that his own financial recklessness, no longer propped up by the unspoken guarantee of me as his safety net, was causing him serious problems. My mother sent a tearful, rambling letter a few months later, full of justifications and veiled accusations, ending with the question, "How could you do this to your family?" I never replied. I had learned a crucial lesson sometimes. The family you choose, the colleagues you respect, the community you build, is more real and more loyal than the family you are born into. My new family was the people of Sterling and Finch. And so here we are. My life is different now. It's busier, more complex. But it's a life built on purpose. I still spend time in the archives, in my quiet, climate-controlled world, but now, when I walk up the stairs and into the main building, I'm not just a memory keeper. I'm a guardian of the future, a future that is deeply, unshakably rooted in its past. It's funny. Alistair Finch and my brother both told me I didn't understand the real world, but they were wrong. Their world of spreadsheets and buzzwords and bottom lines is a fragile illusion. The real world is built on things with weight, with history. It's built on promises kept, on skills honed over generations, on the quiet integrity of doing a job well. They thought history was an indulgence. They didn't understand that history is gravity. You can ignore it for a while, you can pretend you're flying, but sooner or later it will always, always pull you back down to earth. My story isn't really about revenge, though I'll admit the vindication was sweet. It's about value. It's a reminder that the things we discard as unnecessary overhead are often the very foundations we stand on. So I'll ask you this: what in your life has been dismissed as unimportant? What passion have you been told is a waste of time? What quiet truth do you hold that the loud, arrogant world has tried to shout down? Don't let them. Protect it, archive it, because you never know when that one single unnecessary thing will turn out to be the most powerful thing you have. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. And please, share your own stories in the comments below. I'd love to read about the times you stood your ground, the times you proved the doubters wrong. It's in sharing these stories that we remind each other of our own strength. Take care and never ever let anyone tell you that who you are is an overhead.